1906, 1 was about nuclear fission, 2 is a chain reaction, 3 is a critical mass, 4 was an atomic bomb, and 5 you could take your choice out of Fermi, Hahn, Strassmann, Meitner, Frisch, Bohr, Szilard, Einstein, Oppenheimer, Seaborg, Bush, Conant, or Groves. Lots of options there. Tell you some stories, and I'll look ahead at 1907. Not funny stories, but history stories, just to illuminate this section a little bit. But when you go to read 1907 for the next paper up, there's only 3 new points. 3 points from 1907. Quiz, trims, some as always. I'm going to cut from 7 to 20. 7 to 20 is gone. The half-life question from 21 down, those things we're keeping. And then we go to the top and do some switch-arounds. So number 1, I'll go backward. What is nuclear fission? It's a splitting a nucleus to give 2, plus some neutrons and some energy. So when you cut a nucleus into 2 parts, there's energy that gets released by nuclear fission. Chain reaction will go backward. It's a self-sustaining reaction where a product is one of the reactants. So the idea is you have something, you do this chain reaction, you get more of it, and more of it, and more of it, and more of it. When you have the product being one of the reactants, that's called a chain reaction. Critical mass is the minimum amount of radioactive substance needed to make a chain reaction. If you only had this much stuff, it might not be able to make a chain reaction. You might need this much stuff. So if you get over that threshold above the minimum level that you need to make a chain reaction, that's called a critical mass. Then I go into the nuclear bomb history, the atomic bomb history here, with some specific questions relative to the story. So one question is, well, let me do a quick summary and then I'll do the questions. So the basic scheme they had was, in Germany in the 30s, working for Hitler, they had 3 people, Hahn, Strassmann, and Meitner, who were working on trying to develop Hitler a bomb. Meitner was a Jew, so Hitler was not real big on the Jews, which you probably know from history class. So Meitner got tossed out of the country. Meitner leaves the country and got tossed from the project. And because these 2 had worked with a Jew, their research was called Jewish tainted. And Hitler made those guys like start over. The Jew has tainted your research, Jew leaves the country, these 2 still stay behind to work for Hitler, but their research, it's like do overtime because the Jew has tainted their research. So prejudice actually helps the world in a sense, because if Hitler weren't crazy and saying prejudiced against Jews, he probably would have had the bomb before the U.S. did. But Meitner leaves. Meitner connects to Frisch. I think that was a family relationship. Frisch is working with Bohr. Bohr is a famous scientist guy. Bohr is friends with a person named Szilard. Szilard is in the USA, so we make a USA contact. Szilard is friends with Einstein. Einstein is very famous now and also then. So the president at the time was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Szilard writes a letter to Roosevelt, but has Einstein sign it because he's more famous, and Szilard figures, I guess, the president would take Einstein more seriously than him. So Szilard writes the letter, but Einstein signs his name. They send him a letter and basically describe, like, these guys are building a bomb. If Germany is successful, they're going to rule the world. USA better get the bomb made before they do. So FDR agrees to that plan and lists Oppenheimer, Seaborg, Bush, Conant, Groves, a variety of other people in the project here. And the U.S. does eventually build a bomb that plays a part in ending the war, but also in killing a lot of people, because I'm not going to weigh in on the morality of war, I suppose, but that is pretty much the way you end a war, is by killing people on the other side, for just the way that goes. But So questions that branch off of this, I'll ask, why was Germany not the first to develop a bomb? And it's because one of the three main scientists was a Jew, and Hitler forced her out and viewed the research then as Jewish tainted. You don't have to mention Meitner's name, but that's who that was. I asked what US scientists approached the president about the bomb, and that would be Szilard and Einstein. I asked who the president was who was doing that, and you could say FDR if you don't want to spell out Franklin Roosevelt. There's a famous code name for this research thing. It was called the Manhattan Project. So that's a question. What was the code name for this research? It was the Manhattan Project. And it went across different places. You don't have to name the places, but Oak Ridge, Tennessee was a place. Some was in Washington. Some was in Chicago. Some was in a place called Los Alamos out west. But they spread that around in pieces just so people didn't even have a full picture of what was going on there. It's pretty secretive at the time. I asked where, when the first bomb got tested, and that was in New Mexico, 1945. So you'll need to know New Mexico, 1945. I think that was at the Los Alamos site. Roosevelt at some point stops being president, and he's not the one who dropped the first bomb, but toward the end of World War II, bombs were dropped to try to end the war. After Pearl Harbor happened and the Japanese had attacked the US and drew us into the war, they were looking for ways to end the war. Oppenheimer wrote a letter basically begging the president not to drop the bomb and kill people because he didn't really want to be part of that. But the president eventually decided to do that anyway. Oppenheimer was highly suggesting, please just do a public test of the bomb and hope that people would back off and surrender and we don't have to use it. And I don't know if that would have worked or not. It sounds like a great idea, test the bomb publicly to kind of scare people into surrender, but I don't believe it would work personally. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'll explain my theory in a second. Well, question that you'll be asked, what US president made the decision to drop the first atomic bomb? It was Truman. I asked where it was dropped, and it's Hiroshima, Hiroshima. And this is where I sort of don't think that the public test would have made the Japanese surrender, because they dropped this bomb on Hiroshima. I mean, it's a terrible result. It killed a lot of people, but they didn't surrender off of that. There was a second bomb dropped 3 days later. That'll be in the quiz. When was the second bomb dropped? It's 3 days later. Where that second one was dropped is on here, which is Nagasaki. But even after the second bomb dropped, they didn't surrender right away. Bomb 1 dropped on August 6th. Nobody surrenders. Bomb 2 drops on August 9th. People still don't surrender. It wasn't until the 14th that a surrender happened. And so I just I like Oppenheimer's idea on the surface. I think that was a good one, trying to avoid killing people. I'm all for that. Do the public test and maybe hope they'd surrender. But I don't think it would have happened, because if bomb 1 didn't do it, and it required bomb 2, and bomb 2 didn't do it, and it took 5 more days, I don't think if 2 bombs plus 5 days is what it took. I don't know that the public test would have really gotten the job done. That would have been, I think they said 200,000 people died from the bomb, which is tragic, absolutely. But if the war had continued endlessly in World War II, more than 200,000 people would have probably died. War is a mess, no matter how you hash it, but that's some history and opinion for you. In case you got lost there, the new questions beyond how 1, 2, 3 went backward were, again, why Germany wasn't the first, the 2 US scientists that approached the president, the US president that did the research, who's FDR, the code name, which is Manhattan Project, where, when for first bomb test, New Mexico, 1945, US president that dropped the bomb was Truman, where, Hiroshima, when the second one dropped, it's 3 days later, where that was, Nagasaki. So that's all on there for next quiz up, 1907.